Yeah, I first got on the international map with my book, The Art of Macking. I did a book, I wrote it in 1999. It came out in 2000. And it was a dating book, but it was coming from the perspective of a guy who's laced with a little bit of game. And it was kind of teaching guys how to have some game when you're dating out here. And what was interesting about that book at the time, 1999, most of the books that were out were like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It was these real corny books telling men to be real emotional and you gotta feel, and it's a whole bunch of really goofy stuff that was out at the time. And I wanted to write a book from a real dude's perspective. Young dudes going to the club, spitting, hollering at girls and what they think and what works. So I put the book out, The Art of Macking, just kind of feeling and seeing how it was going to do. And the book became a huge seller, man. And we sold 250,000 copies of that book. I was all in the media. All of the major book publishers started to hit me up, like, how in the hell did you sell all of these books like this? And then I got several different book deals. I got my next book deal with Simon & Schuster, and we did a book called Player Be Played for women. They wanted me to do another Macking book. I said, no, I want to do something for women. I wanted the book to be called The Game for Women. They were like, oh, it's too street. We got to make it, more commercial. So they came up with the title Player Be Played. So we put that book out, and that did great. My next book was called The Mac Within, or follow-up to The Art of Macking, another big seller. So, my books were doing good, and I was doing a lot of stuff on MTV, VH1, doing stuff with the Conan O'Brien show, The Tonight Show. And for a while, they were trying to give me a television show doing relationship advice because it was so unconventional. This guy giving relationship advice mixed with a little street edge. That was a new thing. But that created what would be called the pickup artist movement. A lot of these white boys started getting stuff from my books and they created their little thing with it. So that became a movement. So I was a part of that whole scene.
So where do you trace how you got game? Where do you trace how your skills in terms of this Macking? Take me back to when you first started to develop as a young man. Where did your game come from?
Well, living out here in LA, I came out in LA as a young teen, and I started hanging around all the hustlers and all the street cats. And also I was homeless too when I came out, so I would have to stay in the library during the day and just kind of sleep in there a little bit. And at night I would hang out with all the street cats, soaking up game from them. But I would have to be in the library, just to keep out of the elements. And I would read all these books. I would read random books about everything, psychology, history. So I would mix all of that stuff in with what I was learning from these street cats, and I just put it together and it made sense.
Okay, and where did you come from before you arrived to LA?
Yeah, I was living in Birmingham, Alabama. I was born in Detroit, left Detroit around 4 or 5 years old, lived down in Alabama. There was this, in the 70s, there was a reverse migration with a lot of black people. They were leaving the North and going back down to the South, starting in the 70s, because it was getting kind of rough in the North, just fresh out of the riots, a lot of economic deprivation going on up in the North. So a lot of people were moving back down to the South with their families. So that's what they did with me, because there was a lot of drugs going on in Detroit and they didn't want me to get caught up. So I went down to Alabama, lived there. Bored as hell. Much love to Alabama, much love to Birmingham. I lived in Birmingham, Leeds, and all of those places. Good people, but it was just a little slow motion for me. I got a one-way plane ticket, came on out here to LA, and never looked back.
What do you think was the motivation to pick Los Angeles as a destination?
That was the furthest place I can go that the ocean would stop me from going further. I had to get as far away as possible. I didn't want to go to New York because, again, I lived in Detroit and I knew what the cold was like. So, you see LA on television, you see all of these people at the beach, you see the palm trees, and that's when they used to really sell LA. Beverly Hills Cop, movies like that. Everything you saw about LA was just glitz and glamour, and I wanted to get into music production too. So I came out here and hit Hollywood Boulevard and saw what it was really like. And remember, this is in the 80s, so it's like, damn, this is nothing like what we saw on TV. So it was a culture shock, but as a young kid, that was okay because, when you're young and you go through trials and tribulations, your mind can handle things better than when you're older. When you're older, a lot of psychological shocks your body and your mind can't really deal with it. So I was rolling with the punches.
Yeah, it is a culture shock for people who don't know when they get here. Because
yeah.
all you have about LA are the images through television, magazines, newspapers, and things of that sort, right?
Right, and gangster rap wasn't even out yet, so we didn't even know about the rap scene. So that whole image wasn't out, so nobody knew about the gangs and all of that stuff out here. In between, when I got out here, man, again, I wanted to do music production. I like to tinker with drum machines and stuff, so that was my thing. I wanted to come out and do the music thing. I wanted to be like Full Force and all of these hip hop music producers. I was a real big hip hop head, and I wanted to deal with music. So I was working in little studios doing beats for a lot of local groups. At the time, during the late 80s, early 90s, you had a lot of the gangsters and the drug dealers who had rap artists at the time, or even they rapped. So they would come in and buy studio time. We would sell beats for real cheap. So I made a living doing that for a long time. So that's how I started learning and getting connected with a lot of the street dudes. They would all come in the studios. And in the early 90s, a lot of people put all the gangster stuff on death row. That gangster stuff was going on in the music industry with everybody. A lot of people were on that, running up in record labels, gangstering record deals and stuff like that. So that was a thing out here that a lot of folks don't know about. So there was a lot of gangsters involved in the music industry and the studios and stuff like that out here. So that's how I got connected with a lot of those cats.
Now, were you thinking about race and white supremacy? Because now that's what you're known for now. But it seems a little unusual writing a book about Macking and how to get chicks, and then understanding the vestiges of slavery and then white supremacy and racism. Those are like kind of polar opposite themes.
Well, what's interesting, I've always been conscious about the racial aspect of everything, because I would get books from guys. They would give me books from Shahrazad Ali. I read Dr. Welsing's book in 1991, blew my mind. Back in those days, we would get VHS tapes of Khalid Muhammad and other conscious people, also from white people like Jordan Maxwell. I think it's Jordan Maxwell or Maxwell Jordan. It was a white man who would talk about conspiracy theories. So a lot of these knowledgeable underground tapes were circulating around LA. We can go down to the SO1 bookstore, some of these other bookstores, Malik Books and places like that, and get information and still kind of be, with the gangster goofball shit, but we still would get knowledge too. There's always been that dichotomy. If you talk to the average street dude in LA, most of them are very intelligent. Even if you go to jail, you talk to some very intelligent brothers. Just because the cat is in the street, that doesn't mean that brother is not intelligent. The people who put me up on Dr. Welsing's book, these were street dudes. A lot of dudes who put me up on books and gave me knowledge and game were some of the most gritty gangsters niggas you ever want to see. There's always been that dichotomy. So I've always been race conscious, and when I did my book, I'm just talking about it from the perspective of relationships, but what was interesting, more white people started getting my books than black people, because I started going on MTV, so my books were going internationally. So black people who would ask me questions about the book would be, hey man, if I'm at the mall and how can I get this girl? White people would always ask me racial questions about the book. Hey, does this work for a white guy? If I do this as a white guy, can I do this? I'm like, that's a very interesting perspective to look at it. The race thing kept coming up. And according to Dr. Welsing, race is in everything we do. We're dominated by white supremacy. And if you keep talking about something, all roads are going to lead to racism. She said that, and that's absolutely true, because when you're dealing with relationships, you're dealing with procreation. And when you're dealing with procreation, you're going to deal with race, because all of the laws that we've had in this country, they've all boiled down to stopping us from procreating with white people to a certain degree, keeping the races apart or keeping the races controlled as far as who they're sexually involved with. You understand? So when we look at a lot of laws, the basis of it is race. The Loving versus the state of Virginia. You know that movie Loving, which is that about? That was a racial case, because in Virginia, a lot of black people, or people who were later classified as black, were actually Native American. The woman in that Loving versus Virginia case, she's actually a Native American. She's not African American. A lot of folks don't know that. There was a white man named Walter Plecker changing everybody's birth certificates. If a person looked black or their parents looked black, he would just change them to Negro, even if they weren't Negro. That's what that case was about. She married this white man, and she was really a Native American, but they said, hey, you're a Negro, because we changed your record years ago, so now it's illegal for you to marry this white man. So that whole loving thing, that was a racial case, even though it was about relationships. So relationships in race, there's always this constant about it. So I had to talk about the elephant in the room when talking about relationship. Let's get into this race thing and let's really tackle it and knock it out.